So, hey, real quick, if your project schedule looks like it was built in 1997, it's probably because it was. Some scheduling software out there, and you know which ones I'm thinking of, haven't exactly kept up with the times. And let's be honest, nobody opens those schedules and feels great about it. So, Planair is a modern CPM scheduling platform built for construction teams who actually want to use their schedule. So, real time, collaborative, visual, and powerful enough to handle the complexity without making you hate your life. There are better ways to plan, and Plein Air is one of them. Check them out.
All right, well, let's just jump into it. Hugh Seaton, welcome to the podcast. How you doing, man?
I'm great. Great to be here.
I feel like I've been wanting to have you on for a little bit, Hugh, for a variety of reasons.
He's been playing hard to get, Steven.
I know. Hugh does that
I'm
well.
known for that. I'm known for my shyness and fear of a microphone. No, but it's lovely to be on. You guys are doing a great job.
Well, I appreciate that. I think, you are a few different things. Author, strategist, founder. I think you're,
Dog owner.
Multiple dog owner.
Multiple dog owner.
But I think lately, you've provided a really good kind of industry agnostic perspective into a lot of the AI conversations. And so that was one of the few reasons I wanted to have this conversation. And so, maybe just to kind of position the first question, in kind of the realm of AI, you've been kind of mentioning to the construction tech community, like the need to pull back a little bit and just look at this through the lens of kind of this moment in history. So where do you see kind of AI right now, kind of more broadly as a technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think any technology this big and this fundamental takes a while, right? So you look at mobile, you look at the internet, and the internet is probably the one people will remember the most clearly because it went through stages where you had to download, your AOL at one point, but back in let's call it 1998, 1999, we had these really janky websites that you had to click to re-download, and you think about what that was like versus what it was like 5 years later or 10 years later, and now we have the cloud and SaaS and the internet on your phone. The point is that we need to understand that we're early in a process. I mean, just today, another model came out, and doesn't matter when somebody listens to this. That's probably more or less true. So it's happening so quickly right now, and as the as the data centers build out more, you're going to see that happen for a while. That they're going to be competing on increments of how good their models are. The point of all of this is not to look at AI right now and make an assessment of how good, bad, or indifferent it is, but to say, okay, what can we do now that will prepare us for a year, 2, 3 years later, as not just the AI, but the tools around it get better to the point where it's useful for people that don't care. That's when it really matters, right? Is when people that aren't nerds about this stuff are like, okay, I'm not sure how I'd live without my little agent swarm or agent fleet.
Let me ask the $1 million question just to kick this thing off. So, construction industry isn't necessarily known for pivoting quickly and being able to really embrace and successfully adopt technology quickly, right? It takes a while, and I've known so many companies that fail in adopting a project management solution who never really adopt an accounting platform that actually structures their business, or and the list is long. The list is so long, and so with how quickly things are moving. Every day there's a new headline. To your point, it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get faster. So you're a construction company. What do you do? What do you do when you're constantly being onslaughted with this volume of information, the speed of information, and the overwhelm of it all? Not to mention, you spent, we'll call it $100K on Procore for year one, and the team didn't adopt any of it.
I think the difference between AI and other things is, like it or not, people are using it. So a good analogy is probably mobile, where there was a period when, whether it was construction or other industries, your people were answering their emails on their phones, and people lost their minds for a little while because that was super insecure, and then they figured out some mobile device management. So right now, anyone under the age of 22, you have to assume they just got through high school or college with ChatGPT writing their essays. So whether you want to adopt it or not, your people are using it. They're figuring out how to, what's going on with a contract, or dumping specs in there to see what's going on. So I think the difference. I'll answer your question properly in a sec, but I do want to set the stage that not every technology is the same, and I think talking about adoption of technology in a broad sense can be a little bit misleading, because things that are clearly written or created for the office really struggle when people aren't in the office. And we saw that 10 years ago when, essentially accounting software was put on mobile. Other things, though, like find the other industry that, other than maybe oil and gas, that uses drones like construction does, right, or uses reality capture, or uses 3D modeling. They exist, but it's pretty rare, and there aren't a lot of accountants that do that. So for sure, there are some structural and some kind of individual reasons why a lot of software and a lot of technology struggles in construction. One of them is that you don't have a CIO just buying for the company. Like, that's hugely different. But I think AI is a little bit different because people are using the chatbots at home. They're using, like, no one uses Procore to figure out what to do this weekend, but they are using chatbots.
Or how to write or help write a letter to an owner, or help write and polish it, a letter to a subcontractor. I guess, though, to sort of reorient my question is do you get the sense that companies are holding back on implementing or adopting larger platforms because of how the pace of the change? Meanwhile, here's a ChatGPT account. Go interact. Go get super curious. Because we're struggling doing sort of what we've been trying to do for 10, 15 years or whatever. Does that make sense?
100% does. And I think we're definitely seeing that. So as I run out and talk to contractors about AI and how they might adopt it or what they might do, there's definitely a concern among some of them that I don't want to invest in something like a bespoke solution right now because I'm afraid the models are going to get so good they can just do it.
Right.
I think that's probably overdone, but I understand their concern because they've all dropped money on things that no one used, to your point,
right,
or that's probably the big one. I think that the models are already good enough to do most of what we want them to do. The big innovations, I think, in 2026 are going to be what they're wrapped up in. So the first part of the year, you've seen these agent harnesses like Claude Cowork, and there's some other things. OpenClaw was another one that really wrap the models into a useful framework to get stuff done. It's super early, and honestly, most people haven't touched it yet. But I think that's going to wind up, that kind of thinking is going to wind up being real valuable. And your original question is, what do they do now? And I think the starting point is to say, let's get our arms around the chatbots we know they're using. And everyone's had a policy. Usually the policy is very focused on security, which frankly is the least of their worries. Thinking they've got an easy button is probably the biggest worry. And the second one is, I don't know what it is, but chatbots cannot answer concisely. Even when you tell them to, you still get two pages. So getting good at prompting so that you're just getting what you want instead of, because you think about what happened when mobile came out. The difference between at work and not at work dissolved, right? And it creates all sorts of mental health issues. People don't show up fresh the next day. They're a little annoyed that they're trying to have dinner with their family and they're getting texts or calls that they know they have to answer. That won't happen with AI, but something related will. And I think that giving people more stuff that they need to consume and think about is a danger. And it's an addressable danger if you know how to prompt. And that's my point is, I think a good early step is recognizing those two problems of overwhelm, and the bigger one really is the easy button. Because AI is not perfect. It doesn't know what's going on in your job. It doesn't have any judgment like a human would. So it's going to give you a first draft of an answer. And if people treat that like a final draft, they're going to get in trouble.
Well, and I think like what we're all kind of pointing at is what we've struggled with as an industry for a long time, which is change management. And kind of the paradigm of change management itself is changing, right? Because I think if you think about how to implement any kind of change, you're assuming some constants, and one of them is that the thing you're attempting to implement is not dynamic. It's somewhat static, and that whole concept is like breaking before. The flip side of that, though, is the technology itself is packaged in a way, in theory, that would reduce friction to implementation.
Lars, did you have a thing before I answer?
Oh, I just my mind
This
hurts
is,
right now. So but Stephen,
he
what's
lives out
crazy
loud.
though?
Like, you can see every
Oh,
word.
every emotion, every thought, just choo choo choo, just little mini rockets and trains all flying around. Now, Stephen, though, what's crazy, and we've talked to other guests. At the end of the day, there's fundamentals in construction that aren't going anywhere, right? And my concern, and I've shared this, is are we getting away from those fundamentals? Are we injecting more complexity? Or are we on this verge of no, we're actually really close to simplifying and focusing after 20 years of sort of like disconnected distractions and failed implementations around technology?
I feel like there's both of those. I'm glad you added that. The change management. A lot of times people think software adoption is change management, and that really is. Of course, it is a little bit, but I think there's an opportunity here to look at how the processes are done. Now, it's a regulated industry that has contracts that everybody, of course, loves. So there are limits to how you can move around certain parts of the process. But if you can start looking at what people do and how they do it and say, all right, there's some things we can't move, but there's some things we can, and there's some things we can automate or augment that make it enormously faster to do some of the shuffling of papers and finding stuff and all that, and summarizing and connecting dots and all that, so that you have a little more time to think about things or pick up the phone and call someone. Your point, Lars, about things that are just going to be true in construction, you're not going to get away from people out in the field figuring stuff out.
Right.
And how many of the solutions and how much of the project is decided and figured out when you're not near a computer. Of course, you have your phone in your pocket, but I think that's not going away. The question is, how do you make that period, that time when somebody's out there, how do you make that more effective? So they're not thinking about, when I go back, I have these RFIs to get into.
Got to write all this stuff and coordinate with this person. Got 15 phone calls to make. Yeah.
The phone
Correct.
calls probably don't go away, but maybe one of the things that I love is that right before a call with like a difficult call, maybe it's with a sub or maybe it's with an owner, or who knows, I want a quick briefing because I just got off another call. So AI can pull together a quick briefing for me to say, all right, you're about to talk to Lars and we know how difficult he can be. And it gives me the ability to just be smarter in that moment. That's a tiny use case, but I think that there's an opportunity, and I think the difference between adopting AI versus really integrating it, and I don't know that you do this right now. I think the first step is what I said before, which is spending the time to just get good at what you got in front of you. And I think the fact that we know there's innovations ahead of us, and we don't quite know what they are, there's some things we know people are working on, but it may work, it may not. Don't sweat where it's going to be. Know that the models are as good as they need to be. It's how you're surrounding them, or how the providers are surrounding them with tools and with guardrails and all that. And that's already, this year we've already seen a big step forward. So the Claude Coworks and the OpenClaws is a meaningful step forward, and it's not an incremental one, it's kind of a big one. So I think you've got the ability now to say, let's just get good at that stuff and let the other things figure themselves out as they come.
Agreed.
Otherwise, you're paralyzed. Otherwise, you're like, okay, I'm just going to wait till some future moment when I think it's good enough. And then your competitor is outbidding you because they can get a bid together faster. They understand the gotchas in the bid if they're there. And they're winning and you're losing because you're slower than they are.
So let's pull the thread on that
Yep.
that kind of analogy we started with, which is if we're kind of at the point of AI where we're looking at kind of internet in the 90s, the businesses that really were able to leverage that moment, maybe they focused on like cable infrastructure, they focused on like some decisions around like data storage. Like what's the analog for the companies that positioned themselves well as internet was maturing in the 90s and early 2000s, with kind of this takeaway of, hey, we're in a constant state of change, but you also can't sit on your hands. So like, how would we? Is it just data strategy? Is that one of the kind of building blocks?
I think people overestimate how much of a blocker data strategy is right now. Obviously, people should be getting better at it.
Yeah.
the thing that always comes up is you hear funny numbers like 95% of construction data isn't used. Well, what do you mean? Do you mean that all my PDFs where I've copied 3 versions of the same RFI, or some conversation that isn't relevant anymore because the thing's been put in place? Like, just because you got 1 million PDFs doesn't mean you've got 1 million data points. It means that you got a lot of stuff to go through.
You got a lot of
So
noise
I
in
talk
that,
to anyone that's doing handover, and you know what I'm talking about, is,
Yeah.
oh my God, you just gave me a terabyte of irrelevant information. Thank you so much for satisfying the contract. So I think that first would be, like I said, some fundamental or kind of basic capability, and using the things yourself, because you're not going to know the limits of it really. I can tell you all day long that, oh, it might hallucinate or it might be incomplete or whatever, but that doesn't mean anything until you played with it. So I think that leaders were using it for their personal life, just to say, look, this is coming, and I'm going to figure out what we're doing this weekend. I want to go to a new barbecue place, whatever. You can start to get an intuitive sense so that you can apply your judgment as a leader or as a PM or as a PE, whatever the level you are. So you can apply your own judgment and say, I think this would help me here, and I don't trust it over there. And no one can tell you that. I mean, they can give you guidelines and a starting point, but ultimately, people that are in the work are going to know where the blockers are that AI as it currently stands can really help. I'll give you an example. So I do some work with SMACNA, and one of their members had seen some webinars I'd done, and he'd been playing around with doing exactly what I said, playing with it himself. And he said, my PMs keep driving me nuts. He had 40 PMs, and they do their timesheets with Excel, right? Like half the industry. And that's a big Excel spreadsheet. So his PMs kept driving him nuts, saying I don't know what cell to do, and you know what I mean. And that's a tiny thing. Are you going to hire somebody to go fix that for you? No, you're just going to live with it and tell them to have a cup of coffee. This guy goes in, he asks ChatGPT, how can I fix this? It gives him 3 options. He chooses a surprising one, which was, I'll write some code for you. It writes the code, tells him to turn on developer mode, which I didn't even know existed. It tells him where to pop it in, and it worked. Now they have this template that when you click a cell, the row and the column light up. There's a million things like that. And that to me is where giving that capability to folks at the ground level and at every level, they're going to start to say, I'm blowing a lot of time just finding the right cell, and then I got to go check the thing, and so on and so forth. So think about that as a thing that people can do right now, is to get smart about it at the individual level, so that people start saying, where might AI make my life better? And I think that the skill that is valuable now is, I heard a really good example. You guys are familiar with parkour? That's the thing where people run around on a.
I knew it. You do parkour. I knew it. I've seen you in videos, Hugh.
That's right. Totally. That's right. Only here in Austin, though.
Parkour.
Yeah, that's right. No, what happens is people that do that get what they call parkour vision, where they look at buildings and they're immediately assessing where they could jump up and how they could do it. Well, I think there's an equivalent of that here, which is kind of AI parkour vision, where you start looking at your work and say, I'm not going to trust it over there because of XYZ, or it won't save me time. But I know that if I connect these 2 steps and have AI sit in the middle, and I'm there to watch what comes out, or however you want to do it, that's a real skill that's not going to get less useful. It's going to compound over time because you'll get better at it. You'll start getting more creative. And at the end of the day, you don't hear construction being described as a creative industry. It's probably one of the most creative industries, because you're constantly figuring out and coming up with new ways of making a circle go into a square hole.
We're naming this episode AI Parkour Vision. Okay.
I mean, that's the best analogy I think I've heard of the way in which AI can augment the human brain.
So I got that from a guy named Nate Jones. So if people want to nerd out, he's got a YouTube channel. I got to give him props. Nate B. Jones.
He's the originator of AI Parkour Vision.
That's right. It was a podcast from a little
while
ago.
Way to reach into the early 2000s for the parkour reference, Nate.
That's right.
So good.
And if you saw the guy, he probably doesn't do parkour. Bless his heart.
So absolutely love what you're saying, and even in my own journey around, AI usage is exactly what you just said, which is, wait a minute, I just opened up this new door, this new capability, solved a problem. And now I have 10 more pick your own adventure doors to go in. Mind is blown, right? But I want to go back to something. And not that I'm a not that I'm like shame on that company, but it's like they're using Excel for timesheets. And it's like that to me is the gap. And there's plenty of like, I think, digital apps. I've certainly used a number of them just on there. People can punch it in, and it's like, no, we're still using Excel for timesheets. And you said 40 PMs I'm guessing mechanical subcontractor, probably 250, 500 plus organization, and they're using Excel timesheets.
But even like I would push back even on that takeaway a little bit, because I think if we think about the like technology as a tool that we leverage, we've been kind of programmed a little bit to think about technology through the lens of like SaaS. But
Apps, right?
as
You're saying apps?
app solutions,
Okay.
but as Claude and ChatGPT have integrated themselves into Excel, it kind of
Changes everything.
transforms the use case
Well,
and the potential value.
well,
So go ahead. You have a lot of.
no, it's just this idea around, when I first started my first construction business, right? It's lack of structure, right? You're sort of starting from nothing. And as an engineer, I desired structure, system, processes, workflows, right? And Outlook and Excel aren't workflows, aren't necessarily processes, right? It's a PDF, or it's an attachment, an email with a data cell and a block and a number that you can go put in an accounting system. But and again, as every morning I wake up and I get these little AI feeds, AI updates, and it's just like my mind is blown with another one, and I desire simplification as an entrepreneur in my organization. I desire enough structure and enough decentralization and autonomy that the operators can go do efficiently what they're extremely good at, right? And not overwhelm them with noise. And Stephen, in this case, in my mind, what I heard Hugh say was, "Hey, we're still doing timesheets over here on Excel," and I'm like, "That's insane." But what I heard you just say was like, "No. Is that the most simplest and basic way, fastest way to now get the output you need as an organization, rather than, hey, for $5.99 a month, you can have, for every person in your organization can digitally submit a timesheet." And, maybe 10 years ago, that was like really slick, but guess what? You don't
Well,
need that
and
anymore.
you can orient some of these sheets with integrated
Right.
Python code, so there's automations that create similar outcomes, right? Go
And
ahead.
Claude is in Excel and PowerPoint now. So I think there's another thread that this leads us to, and that is that AI is going to be embedded in everything. So if you've got a 45-year-old PM who's been doing things a certain way, or whatever the role is, and they're really used to the flexibility of Excel, one of the things that AI, even now and certainly more in the future, is good at is taking things the way you've given it, like the way you give it to it. You don't need to
Right.
put it the way input it the way it needs it. And
Correct.
that's one of the reasons Excel still gets used, is because you can just drop in there
So
what you want to
flexible.
do. Yeah, it's like a piece of paper that you can send people. And I think that you'll find that some of the strictness that SaaS requires isn't required by AI. Now you have control issues, because now you got to make sure that the value of having things exactly the right way is you can predict what's going to come out. But you can handle that in other ways with AI, where you're telling it what you want, maybe giving it an example. So there's other ways to get that control. And once you've done it, it'll repeat it. So I do think that where you can give people the ability to work the way they're comfortable working, and then add the value and intelligence on the back end, that's one way I think that we can really win. And we've got a lot of folks that are the repository of 20, 30 years of experience. How do we make them more valuable? How do we give them more time to mentor, to solve harder problems, to talk more? Because you don't know what someone knows until the problem comes up that they're solving. Like, it's really hard for people to tell you everything. It can't. So the more they're out there helping people, and they've got time, or they're on the tough job, whatever it might be, I think that one of the roles AI absolutely can play is elevating human capability, not replacing it.
You've heard me say this before. I'm skeptical of AI that doesn't make the person better, not the company, not the process, the person. That's why Trunk Tools keeps coming up in my conversations. They're building AI that's human centric, designed to strip away the busy work and let experienced builders like you do what they're actually good at. And here's the thing that gets me: the average worker takes about 5.5 hours a week just looking for project data. That's a full day every week lost to digging through files and folders. So Trunk Tools is tackling that head on. Check the link in the description to learn more.
100%.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about SaaS and the state of SaaS, because I think, part of an underlying assumption in kind of the software space is that each of these companies have a moat around their tech stack, around the time to build, and all of that's being challenged by a variety of different kind of, well, whether it be, the kind of citizen development happening, or just the ease for engineers themselves to kind of spin up new apps. So when you look at some of those challenges, I guess what do you see as the future of SaaS? How does that evolve?
Yeah, I think no one knows. So right, part of being well, part of anchoring us in the early part of a decade-long process or potentially longer is you just don't know. What you probably do know, though, and I quote Satya Nadella, right, the CEO of Microsoft, is that one way of looking at apps is business logic on top of a database. And agents can sit on top of the database and replace the business logic that was in SaaS. Now, fair enough. The moats that they have, especially larger companies, but really anyone, isn't just the tech. It isn't just the software. It's the relationships they have. It's the trust they have. It's the kind of built out familiarity with how to do things. So the moat's probably a little bit stronger than people might think. What really has started to hurt is if you sell on a per seat basis, are you going to be able to grow the number of seats per account? And probably not. And in fact, people are going to say, well, if I can string up an agent to do this for me, maybe I don't need 10 licenses, maybe I just need 2. It's definitely why ServiceNow, Salesforce, and some of those other folks had a rough week a couple weeks ago. So I think the economics of SaaS are up for grabs a little bit. You're hearing things like, let's do a new business model where we charge per outcome. That's a really tough one. Like I get why people are saying that, because agents are supposed to do stuff as opposed to just be there for you to use. The problem is nobody can budget for that. So you'll hear developers and startup founders talk about $10,000 AWS bills because someone wrote something wrong or they couldn't deal with it. And I've heard contractors say the same thing when they went on to AWS or Azure. They were really surprised because they thought they were going to spend X and they spent more. And more to the point, they just don't know how much they're going to spend. So this per SIP, this per use idea, I think they're going to be industries where that makes sense. And like customer support is where it's seeing some success. I think that beyond that, I think people want to know what they're paying. And they'd actually rather pay a little more than have surprising months. I think I just gave you a word salad to say we don't know. It's 2026 is a tough year to make a prediction like that. And obviously people are confidently doing so because they think it's their job, but I think no one knows.
I think one thing we do know is that I think it's going to take some real kind of advances in various use cases, or like just business model creativity, to validate some of the valuations that have historically been in the sector, right? And so,
I've said to you, and I appreciate you not prompting me, but I'll go out and say it. I don't know how you allocate capital right now.
Yeah.
I don't know how unless you're investing in someone in Silicon Valley who's doing some frontier research, I don't know how a VC does what they do. I mean, they're paid the big bucks to figure that out, so God bless them. But right now, you don't know what the cost basis will be. You don't know what your growth is going to be. Everyone says they're going to have $1 billion business because VCs require that. Okay, you can't have $50 billion businesses in construction. I think you get one, maybe two. So long-winded way of saying I think the financing of software companies is going to have a rough year for the same reason that I just said, is you don't really know.
Well, and I think it changes some of the dynamics of the build versus buy decisions and equations in a lot of these businesses, right? Like, I came from an opportunity where in a GC seat, we were analyzing that kind of build versus buy. And historically, I've been fairly anti building internally because of the lack of kind of product management understanding in some of these contractors. And but I think as long and you're seeing this, right? You're seeing Suffolk hire product managers and folks with AI titles and data analysts. And so as you bring some of that talent on board, that build concept looks more attainable. How do you look at that?
I think you're 100% right. I think that the CIO role needs to finally be strategic in GCs as opposed to being functional. I think it needs to be literally C-suite instead of reporting to the CFO. I mean, look, every company is going to make up their own mind, but to do what you just described, which I think is absolutely true, and the reality is that other companies in other industries have had strong CIOs for decades, and they build their own mini apps on top of big platforms. This has been going on forever. But they have a group that is dedicated to that, that's good at it, that has the right rules, has the right incentives and all that. If you're trying to run that kind of an activity with people that came off the field and are thinking with the same risk profile and the same sensibility of putting a building in, it's just not the same. So I think that AI is going to, just like other really big changes, you're going to need to think about who am I staffing and what do I think is strategic for us? And I think that having a CIO who can look at the business and say, here's where we should be and here's where we should invest. Obviously at the discretion of the CEO and presumably the board or something like that. But I think that's going to become a much more important thing than it has been in the past.
Don't disagree with you on that. What percentage of companies in this construction blob actually have a CIO?
Yeah, I don't know. More than I thought. But the question isn't only whether someone has a business card with CIO on it. The question is, who do they report to? So if they report to the CFO, then they're not really, I don't want to cast any aspersions on people with that title, but it means that they're structured in a way where winning is harder than it should be.
No, they have to they're just pushing uphill every day, right?
They're pushing against someone who's looking at cost and risk, which is great. But
Rather
ultimately,
than innovation and speed, yeah.
Yeah, and what's the upside? A great example, if I may, one of the things that I think you're going to see people, and I've heard glimmerings of this, knowledge can be a strategic asset. Knowing how to do things and capturing that and doing things with it. It's not so strategic when you're just showing it to other people, but if you're codifying how we do things, because AI can do that for you and can serve it up and can see what someone's working on and real knowledge management as opposed to an Excel spreadsheet with lessons learned on it. That starts to mean that you're not just covering risk, which is the first step, but you're actually creating new opportunities.
Yeah, the challenge I have with nothing you describe necessarily, I wonder what percentage of companies, the top 100 ENR, versus the rest of the industry from a revenue versus total companies, or you call it top 1,000, right? And what I'm getting at is I believe there is a massive chunk of this industry that many owners actually have to deal with that will never ever budget for a CIO. And that because they don't have the time, they don't have the vision, they don't have the awareness, they see it as a drag, a distraction. And so it's almost like the separation gap just continues to occur. I don't know, but that's that small business, large business, sophisticated. Now, I believe there's transition occurring, right? Like all of a sudden, that young, hungry entrepreneur who now is experimenting with Claudebot or Pickett, like all of a sudden has the most badass estimating spreadsheet because they were able to just put all this intelligence in there. Like that's fun. That's a game changer.
Don't you think this is one of those moments where it's worth remembering how many different project types there are and how many different GC focuses there are? So this is where the talking about construction generally kind of breaks down a little bit. If you're building the same type of box in the same area over and over again, you're right. You kind of know it already. It's not, as opposed to building really big, complex buildings, God forbid it's a data center. So I do think that you're going to find a real difference. And it might, look, at the end of the day, the company has to make up their mind about how they're competing and who they're competing against.
Yeah,
And
what
if
their
they're-
market sector is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it matters more now because there's opportunities to be that much better, but it's still going to be an expense.
Yes.
And if that expense really doesn't buy you very much, then they're right to do what they're doing. Or more importantly, if they're saying within the next year or 2 years, I don't trust that our adoption isn't going to create more risk and expense than it's going to save, then maybe they say we're going to hang on and just do what we do and take more people out to dinner.
But I think that's where, I mean, we are in such a period of disruption that I think we're going to have some real separation. I think we've gone through a period of, I don't know, 34 plus years of, I don't know why I picked 34, it's a very specific number, but 30 plus years where the big boys have gotten bigger, the regionals have got, everyone's gotten bigger, and obviously but there's a bit of parity in terms of end product, but I do think that's coming to an end, because I could see, and I've made this prediction before, obviously AECOM acquiring Consigli kind of took the lid off that box. But if a contractor is fairly forward thinking and maybe doesn't have that CIO talent, they go buy it. They go buy a business on the tech side that is going to kind of fundamentally enable a differentiation in their end product, but also close the gaps in terms of internal capabilities to think through strategically how to leverage these technologies. They're going to be in a different place than a contractor who maybe historically has a CFO, who has an uncle who has a renovation business, right? Like that, like historical model. So I do think we're kind of coming upon that time.
I think you're right. I just think not for every segment. I think there's going to be some segments where
Agreed,
they are.
construction's big.
That said, what's funny is we've just worked on a project with an aggregates company. And they're everything you just described. Like, it's somebody founded it, and it's guys with big trucks moving lots of rocks. I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it, but the thing is, if one of those breaks down, they can tell you how much money they lose per hour. So we built a machine learning model that took their data, which they thought was really bad, and they're right, it was less than they wanted it to be. But we were able to say, I can't tell you what broke, but I can tell you it's one of these 5 things. Which means that instead of having to drive 50 miles out to a job site, identify what it was, drive back, get what they need, and then basically take 2 days to go fix something, and every hour is thousands of dollars of lost money. They're able to go just drive straight out there and say, okay, I've got in the truck what I need. I think there's a lot of opportunity for that kind of thing, and we use AI right now to pretty narrowly mean generative AI and chatbots, really. But it's a big tent. There's machine learning in there that you can. If you don't think I need this to be like software where I press a button and it gives me the exact answer. If you say, if you can make my decisions better, this isn't quite the parkour vision thing, but it's sort of like that. If you can give me the ability to reduce decision time or more, efficiently make decisions, I'm still making the decision, but it's faster and we've saved money. So I think there's an opportunity there too. It's just the right person has to meet the right person to tell them that, because very few people running an aggregates company are saying, you know what I think we need some ML in here, right alongside the old cowbell. So I think that the other thing that there's an opportunity for, I'm obviously biased here, but just like contractors bring in consultants for engineering they don't know, whether it's MEP or something like that, there's an opportunity here to do what the rest of the economy does and say, I don't know AI that well. Let's bring in somebody to help us out.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let me ask this question, Hugh. You are building a SaaS product, the Link. It helps provide kind of clarity in the spec space, and from our kind of history together, I think specs is a thing that hasn't gotten a lot of SaaS love. It's maybe getting a bit more these days. But kind of in the light of the previous conversation we've had around the challenges in the SaaS category, how are you thinking about building a SaaS product and you're kind of layering in some kind of strategic services around AI consulting? You actually, the Link got a shout out from a previous guest, the Steve Little from Fresh Market was just mentioning some of the tools that he really likes interacting with, and mentioned the Link as one of them. So I guess walk me through how the marriage between your kind of industry view of AI and how you're baking that into what you're building with the Link.
Yeah, I think this is everything I just said about this being an interesting year for SaaS applies here. So it's if you've got a product that's, especially if you don't have a ton of distribution, like a Procore or a Kahua, now is the time to say, how is this enhancing what I have already, and maybe build a little less than you might. Like before you go build an entirely new category of product type, maybe hang on a little bit and see where the world ends, at the end of this year or early next year. I think that we don't quite know what an agent's going to be able to do. The other thing that we've spent a lot of time on is aggregating data. So a database of usually publicly available specs that we're able to get from various places, that we've categorized and really broken apart, so that as AI gets more powerful and more useful, you have whether you call it a moat or just a differentiator, the ability to assess a spec based on 10,000 specs that you're looking at, that you've got in your database. I think that's one opportunity. If you ask me that question in February of 2027, I promise you I'll have a different answer, because we just don't know. The fact that in December of last year, I couldn't have told you that CoWork and OpenClaw and these other things would come out and would be as big a difference as I think they are. And I think this year is going to be, everyone says the year of the agent, I don't know what that means, but the agent tooling. Making it so that people don't have to know anything about AI really, to be able to just tell it what they want, go through some work to make sure it gets them what they want. But all that's using normal language. All that's just talking to it. Patiently, I have to admit, but nevertheless, just talking to it.
How many OpenClaw instances do you have running right now?
None.
None. Lars?
I didn't want to go through that's a great question. OpenClaw, it means that you've decided to somehow either create a virtual machine, which is on its own a little bit of a risk, or go and buy a Mac Mini, which have been running out because so many people are doing it. I didn't see the value in that. What I've done instead is really dig into CoWork and build a bunch of skills and plugins and so on and so forth, because I think OpenClaw is going to become very CoWork-like. They'll probably do some unique things. They can do images, which Claude can't. But nevertheless, it's going to be in the same vein, and I expect it probably by the end of March.
Yeah, I have one instance of OpenClaw on a virtual machine, and I've kind of used it as purely an experiment to kind of see what it's possible of doing and or capable of doing, and mainly from like a podcast production standpoint, it's pretty helpful in doing kind of research and those things. But it's not cheap, because it
chews up tokens.
Because the big thing is memory, right? And so that's a big kind of database that it's kind of maintaining from a memory standpoint.
Well, you talk about, that's a really good thing, if you don't mind, I'll just dive into. And it's my point a moment ago about we don't know where we're going to be. One of the things that makes any AI model a lot smarter is if it can think longer. And the reasons they can't think longer is because that costs tokens. Every time a model comes out, and honestly, every time the chips come out, the cost per token goes down by like an order of magnitude. So I think what you're going to find is towards the end of this year into next year, as these big data centers come online, and then more of them next year, and then more of them the year. I mean, they're spending, the hyperscalers, the companies we know, the Metas and so on, are spending something like $650 billion, which is wild. The 2008 bailout was 850, 900, something like that. I mean, we're almost spending as much money on data centers, just those companies, as the U.S. government did to not quite get us out of the 2008. Like, if only. Yeah. But my point is that the magnitude of spend is utterly unprecedented. Even inflation adjusted, the highways didn't cost this much at all. Forget about in 1 year. The railroads didn't cost this. It's unprecedented how much money is being spent. So I think that one of the unlocks over time will be having agents that can run for a long time and not break the bank. Right now, you're right. If you were to get OpenClaw and just let it run, I hope you host your own model, because it's gonna be a mortgage payment.
Will that overcome, like the quantity of available compute? Will that overcome the actual cost of compute with interacting with? Like, if I was reading a thread, and this gentleman kind of calculated every time you ask, ChatGPT or Claude a question, and if you look at the actual compute cost of that question, and if you were to actually be charged the actual cost, it's much higher than your $20 a month, right? And right now everyone's in this like market penetration phase, attempting to kind of gobble up users. But at some point, is that kind of the calculus they're making? Is like,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
the quantity of compute is enough, then that cost comes down over time.
And they've depreciated all of their spend and so on and so on. I think the idea here is just like AWS was loss making until it wasn't, and just like Uber was loss making until it wasn't. Their thinking is we want to get the whole world on one of the platforms, preferably the one who's spending the money. And at that point, again, every time NVIDIA comes out with a new chip, it's the most recent one, Vera Rubin, is 40x faster and more effective than what it's replacing. And everyone thought Blackwell was the second coming. But also beyond NVIDIA, there's companies that are making chips that are specific to inference. And the difference being training is when you do the training and then you publish a model. And that used to be all the expense. But now that everybody's trying to use all these tokens, it's actually on the usage, on the inference side. That's what I don't know if you're familiar with the Cerebrus thing that OpenAI just announced. But they have their first data center with these. And those are the entire data center is made just for inference. Well, the implication is that the cost of using them is going to continue to just drop through the floor. At some point, everyone's like, it'll be too cheap to meter. They've said that before about other things, and I'm not sure I buy that. But I do think it'll get so cheap that it won't be the major consideration.
So I know you've got a hard stop, and I want to focus maybe the last few minutes we have on, there's a portion of our audience that is on the field ops side, and I think at least looking at the data, we don't have a ground up challenge in getting kind of users to adopt some of these technologies, but we do have like a senior leader and C-suite, which we have some listeners in that seat. So let's talk to them specifically, and we did a little bit before, but they listen to this day after. What do you think a VP of Ops, a COO, CFO, what do they, I mean, you mentioned it, just start using some of this stuff, but from an organizational strategy standpoint, what are the practical steps to thinking through how they need to interact with where we're at in this curve?
Yeah, and the tough part about a question like that is people really are all over the place. I mean, there are companies where the leadership has already done a policy and they've done training and they're thinking about it and they've got internal people building custom GPTs, and you got other people where they haven't, and they maybe put a policy out that was pretty simple and was very much about security. I think that
let me recontextualize that, because I think you're right. So I think the scenario is this. I think it's a large, we'll say GC in this instance, who is, their AI strategy is mainly from a risk management standpoint. So they're really focusing on governance. They're focusing on what not to do. How would you respond to that company?
Yeah, I think that there's a few things. One of them is, like you said, get using it, but also get out there and talk to people and bring in people, whether it's a consultant, whether it's somebody. I mean, often I'll just talk to people, give them an hour and say, hey, let's talk about what you're doing. I've got a number of GCs that I just once a month, once every other month, someone in there, and I'll just walk them through what I'm seeing, right? And right now with co-work, obviously I've got a little bit of a bee in my bonnet about it. So I've been doing a fair amount of that type of conversation to say, this is early, but it's going to mean something, and it's actually going to be useful in a way that a chatbot is not. But I do think that start thinking about what real change of process what value real change of process might mean. And for me, one of the big ones that seems obvious is the chain of handoffs between design intent and handover, where you've got this information that gets transformed and people lose a thing or they do a thing and they say a thing and they were supposed to do this, but they didn't quite do that. All that stuff, the amount of risk that's still in that transmission of information, I think is unreasonable. And yeah, there's contracts and people are responsible for things and they have economic incentives for doing as little as possible at certain steps. I don't know who that might be, but maybe the people that wrote the contract. But the point is, fair enough that that's true, but nevertheless, this stuff should be a lot more controllable and visible than it is. And I think that AI can help with that. And a lot of our processes when it comes to moving documents and data back and forth, look indistinguishable from when you were couriering prints to each other.
That's correct.
It's a PDF and you're emailing it, but okay, if you swap the transmission out, it's the same process.
It's the same.
And I'm not sure that needs to be true. You can absolutely audit custody and all the things that a printed paper might help you, in fact, way better than that. So I think that asking where's our risk and where are we losing money and where are our claims coming from, and really saying, is AI able to help us tighten that up and lose less money from claims or from delays or from rework or from everybody talks about rework, and it's really harder than people think it is. But nevertheless, that's a good thing to start thinking about. And back to my point about the more you use it yourself, you're going to have an intuition to say, okay, I maybe I don't know AI that well yet, but I really know that problem. And if I can get an intuition for the tool, I can start seeing where, all right, you know what, we're not going to retool everything today, but I want to inject it in these steps. Or I want this person to spearhead doing that on a project. There's always the case that there's that PM or that superintendent who's absolutely loves technology and is the first, he's like Mikey with the cereal. Finding those people and really leveraging them. One of the things that I'll also say, I do a lot of training for contractors, but also for associations and so on. The degree to which you can get 20, 50, maybe 100's a little bit much, and get them talking about what they've done in a kind of moderated session where you say, all right, everyone, let's write a prompt. And you do it on your phone. All right, what did you do? What did you do? What did you do? A couple things happen. One is you realize more people are doing stuff than you thought, or maybe the other, you're like, what are you people been doing? But also they start to get ideas from each other because, again, this is a creative group. These are people that anytime there's a problem, they want to find a tool and go fix it.
Yeah.
So they're probably said, oh, if they got a little comfortable with it, they probably found some weird thing that they're using it for, or some not so weird thing. So I think that to the degree you can start thinking about leveraging the creativity of your own people to kind of inch each other up, I think that's super powerful. And you've seen contractors do that with like hackathons or with meetings or whatever it might be. It doesn't cost a lot. You can do it usually on in person is best, but you can do it on Zoom if you need to.
I really like that. It's like creating that spark of creativity and then kind of seeing where that goes. And I've seen that even with my wife. Like she runs a small little co-schooling here in the Richmond area. And, back when I started my kind of AI journey early last year, I kind of walked her through some of the use cases. And now like we're trading back and forth. It's like, oh man, you did this. Oh man, I was able to do this. And then it just goes from there. Running
a homeschool, this has to be transformational for her. Because
Absolutely.
like you're not stuck with wait, who did what when? It's like, hang on a minute, ding, ding, ding,
Well,
that education. I think there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, and she's the school has grown from we had 30 kids last year. We have 48 kids this year. But
That's amazing.
And so some of the parents are teaching themselves or teaching as well. And part of the thing is like, how do you manage content and in a very specific kind of methodology, and this is enabling her to scale herself in a way that she wasn't previously able to. Well, this has been really helpful. Lars, any final thoughts?
No, Hugh, awesome. Thank you, bud. I'm pro-core. I'm going to AI pro-core or parkour myself here, not pro-core, parkour myself here. No, just love the perspective, love the sharing, love the experience, and we are at this just very interesting time. Things are getting incredibly easier, but at the same time, it's like it's also getting foggier. Like, where is it going? What can it really be like? And it's like, just hold on, let's watch, let's see.
Well, and let's create it together.
Together.
I mean, at the end of the day, this isn't the weather. Like we get a say in how it gets used.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%.
Love it.
Well, and here's the last question. How big of a prepper are you? Are you a doomer on this, or do you see a hopeful future where we all are just skating on an amazing API?
I think none of the above. I think it's going to be like everything else. It's going to make changes. Society is not going to collapse. We're going to find work for people. We absolutely will. This idea that, and there's an assumption that is in there. I'm really glad you asked that. People have talked about AI as if it's going to be general. I'm sorry, I know the lab guys have to say that, the open AIs and so on. I think they're radically underestimating how good the human mind is at being at dealing with new things and being literally general. I think we're going to have superhuman AI just like we've had superhuman calculators. And it's going to be amazing at some things and remarkably dumb at others for as long as I can think of. I think their use of the term general intelligence is just really narrow. And I think instruction is such a good illustration of how that's not true. Think of all of the implications that a PM, like something happens and they're immediately saying, well, that's going to happen and that's going to happen and I got to call that guy and got to go, make sure they have whatever. That sort of complexity, it's not just knowing what might happen, but it's knowing what's important and why it's important and the personality of the person you got to call first because God forbid, you know what I mean? Like there's just knowing that, and that's the reality of the economy, whether it's in construction or somewhere else, it's a lot of people making decisions under uncertainty based on what they had for breakfast. And only a human can really manage that. And I think AI can absolutely empower it. It can automate certain steps. And the final thing I'll add that we didn't talk about is being in the work is part of getting the work done. So this implication that you can automate everything implies that humans were just approving stuff, or just running through steps, but they didn't think along the way. Doing things makes you're being creative while you're, even if it's in small ways. Being in the work is the only way that you can approve certain types of work. So, just having the human in the loop be an approver at the end, there's going to be processes where that's appropriate. I think people overestimate how many of them there are. So having AI serve things up to you, explain things to you, maybe give you a different view of something, maybe it's a graph, it's a whatever. I think that's going to be way more powerful than people think. I think giving a decision maker unique or new ways of seeing information is going to be super powerful because we're way better at being visual than we are at being numeric or textual.
Yeah.
But automating humans out of it is a mistake that I think a lot of fortunes are going to be lost trying to do because who's going to hang their hat? Would you approve something you weren't part of making? Well, it depends on what it is, but there's a lot of things where if I wasn't in it, I don't know. Like a spec writer, forget it. There's no way they're going to say, hey, it looks right. Those 1,000 pages read perfectly to me.
Who's risk? Who absorbs that risk?
That's right.
I love that. I mean, it's like we still need the man in the arena. And,
You do-
we're just arming the man in the arena with
Arming the
better
man
tools.
with. So I'll end by saying I love this stuff. So if any of your listeners just want a half an hour, I love talking about it, and I love where people are versus where I might be. I just learn a lot from talking to folks.
That's great. Where do they contact you, Hugh? LinkedIn?
LinkedIn's great.
Okay. I'll and I'll link the link as well in the show notes. I always commit to show notes and then I forget, but I'm really going to try this time to do that.
I'll hold them
Hugh,
accountable.
thank you so much.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on. Great
All right, see ya.
job. All right.